There were theories, speculations that Matthew Stafford died and he's been replaced by a clone. If that's the case, dude, this clone is awesome. This clone is unbelievable.
Where is that one coming from?
You haven't heard?
No, I have not heard the Matt Stafford Terminator 2 theory.
So he had that back injury and he didn't practice until late August, and people were like, have you seen Matthew Stafford? Are we even sure Matthew Stafford's alive? He starts practicing late August, and people posted pictures that he was replaced by a clone, and this clone has a birthmark here that the original Matthew Stafford didn't have. He's unbelievable. He's hit 26.5 DraftKings fantasy points in 5 of his last 6 games. Josh Allen's only done that twice all year. Over that span, he has 20 passing touchdowns, which is 6 more than anyone else. What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Week 11 fantasy football. Theo Greminger and Scott Barrett for the School of Scott Fantasy Podcast. We're talking about fantasy football strength of schedule for the fantasy playoffs. Not too early to talk about fantasy football playoffs. Right around the corner, week 11 now. We got a month and then we're in the fantasy playoffs. So we're going to get ready for it right here. But Scott, first off, we've got to talk about possibly the greatest offensive mind we've ever seen calling plays at the NFL level, and that's Dan Campbell. The revenge game of the year. Washington knocks Detroit out of last year's NFC playoffs. Detroit was a big favorite in that game. Jaden Daniels and the Commanders exposed them. Dan Campbell got his revenge this week and then some. The Lions scored on every single play until the last one when Washington basically put up the white flag and surrendered. What are your takeaways here? How excited should we be about Dan Campbell calling plays in Detroit?
Yeah, this is huge. First of all, I just love the decision to do this. The Lions came into the week ranking behind only the Colts in points per game, and Dan Campbell's like, no, that's not good enough. We could do better. I could do better, and they did. The Lions put up 44 points, 546 yards. That was the second most by any team in any game this season. And this isn't all that surprising to me. This is something, I've talked about for a while, where people were giving Ben Johnson way too much credit for Detroit's success. When Ben Johnson would talk about it, when Dan Campbell would talk about it, when any other coach would talk about it, it was always a very collaborative process. And you saw Dan Campbell on the sidelines when Ben Johnson was the play caller, but Dan Campbell had the play call sheet in his hands. You heard him talking into the mic. And so, yeah, I think, and look at, all the credit that Ben Johnson gets for the Jared Goff resurgence that actually started with Dan Campbell before Johnson was the OC. It was in Dan Campbell's first year there. It was Anthony Lynn, the play caller. And then Ben Johnson takes over around the halfway mark. And that's when Jared Goff really turns a corner. Jared Goff's passer rating in 7 games with Dan Campbell calling the plays is higher than it is in Ben Johnson, 51 games. And so, my thing is, he just seems like a meathead. You assume he's dumb, and, he has said dumb things like biting kneecaps, but no, what's the opposite of a fake sharp? That's what Dan Campbell is. And I would say this, even if we throw out the success that Detroit had, if you just judge it by the process, process over results, so incredibly impressed by what we saw in week 10. These are some of the biggest play calling efficiency hacks at the NFL level, in terms of helping your offense score more points, but also from a fantasy perspective in many of these cases. Jared Goff's play action rate basically doubled, jumped to a season high 52% in week 10. Motion on 79% of his dropbacks, easily a season high. They posted their highest PROE, pass rate over expectation, of the season. Their under center rate jumped from 28% to a season high 49%. Their 11% their 11 personnel usage rate went to a season low 54%, down from 70%. And like basically all these are exactly what you want your offense to be doing, your play caller to be calling. And so, yeah, I think this is worth a substantial boost to all of Detroit's players. I do expect this offense to be better. They're doing everything you would want them to be doing. And so this is meaningful. This is substantial for your fantasy rosters. I think you're not downgrading either of the running backs. The split looked identical to what it was in 2024, not 2025, but Gibbs, back to his 2024 levels of hyper efficiency. So maybe Montgomery gets more volume. Maybe Gibbs, his hyper efficiency is re-unlocked. So no one gets a downgrade there. Jameson Williams obviously had his most successful game. You saw some people on Twitter talking about how the usage was totally different. The usage was basically exactly the same. Like really nothing changed. His rate of go routes dropped like 5%. It was kind of nothing. He was just targeted more. So he was just targeted more in this game. But outside of that, like horizontal route rate the same, slot rate the same. But I mean, he was targeted more, and this has been a theme and something we've talked about for weeks now, trying to get him going. And so, yeah, there's plenty of room for that to go up. So he benefits. Amon-Ra St. Brown might be the only something to monitor. It's just, he had his lowest target share since week 1. So keep an eye on that. He was having a career year fight by fantasy points per game. So if anyone were to get knocked, it would be him. But I don't know. I'm kind of not worried at all, just because I do expect this offense to be better, and everyone else gains ground.
Yeah, I love how you started off by talking about like the reputation Dan Campbell's carried. We remember so many of these NFL reporters who were so negative to him when it came to that introductory press conference. People saying he was going to fail. People hated the whole persona. It's almost like it's sort of a discrimination against a dude who's completely jacked and like alpha male type energy. I think that you can kind of juxtapose it with some of these guys that failed. Dan Campbell knows how to win a locker room tremendously, but he's also an unbelievable football mind. And I think that it was the Minnesota game. The Minnesota game was the one we're coming out of a bye week. He said, this is not right, and took over. And this offense looks incredible. And with Jahmyr Gibbs, I think we can sacrifice a little bit of touches to David Montgomery because Gibbs is just such a next level talent. And also the pie grows larger with this offense just being so good. Jameson Williams actually, like, it's been about a three-week stretch of this one. Like, if you take away the Tampa Bay game, he had 18.6 points against the Chiefs, 16.6 against Minnesota, and 23.9 this past week. So it's been really a 3 weeks of just ramping up and ramping up. I took a lot of L's on Jameson Williams early in the season. I talked about him on a lot of podcasts. I know Brett Whitefield was also very enthusiastic about him. So I was never really wrong. I just need to be patient. And Jameson Williams is there for us. So I love it. I love seeing Dan Campbell
I don't really like Jameson Williams. I like that he's a pass catcher and maybe the best offense in fantasy. But I really don't have a ton of faith in it. Like, just every freaking week, it's if you paid him all this money, and every week it's, oh, we got to get him going. It's my bad. I feel like, if you're the level he's regarded in fantasy and redraft DFS, like, you should be more foolproof, for a player that's really cleared 66 receiving yards only twice all year. And we're in year 4. Or do you see it differently? Do you still have a ton of faith in his talent? And, Dan Campbell, took over play calling duties for a reason. And part of that was because it's inexcusable, Williams had the production he did.
Well, I think that you sort of nailed it. They're constantly talking about it because I think they're committed to the player. Brett Whitefield's talked about like what we saw from Jameson Williams in like preseason at practice. That sort of got me excited. And I think that this coaching staff is committed to using him, getting him the ball. And Scott, you talked about it, like sort of the lack of receiving yardage. But with Jameson Williams, he's one of these players sort of like in the lens of a Tyreek Hill that can take one touch and house it and sort of affect a fantasy game in just a tremendous way. So I think if they're committed to getting him the ball, we've seen now 3 out of 4 weeks with it. I know he can be a frustrating player, but I think that there's a lot to like about this situation. I think you don't want to go like over the moon here and make like a huge trade offer for JMO, but I do think that there's a number of fantasy managers who don't trust the production, and you've sort of you said it. You're bullish about everyone here. I think this is an offense where, like Indianapolis, you just start everyone, and you're going to take your, it's a little bit different than Indy. Obviously, Indy, a lot of the fantasy points are going directly to Jonathan Taylor, but there's very few offenses in the NFL that we think are capable of putting up 40 points on any given week, and Detroit is probably, in your confidence level in offenses right now, where would Detroit lie? They'd have to be like top 3 right now.
In
the NFL
offenses,
in just offenses you trust the most, where without looking at the schedule you pick, Detroit's 1 or a little bit lower.
I think they're 1.
I think so. You just nailed it.
One of the stats I referenced for it was, I said there was their highest PROE pass rate over expectation of the season. It was actually, I think, their second highest in a road game since like week 4 of 2023. But that's just like a massive point where it's not just like this is one of the most efficient offenses by yards per play, points per drive, EPA. It's their aggressiveness, where it's not just, it's late, deep into games, positive blowouts. They're ahead by 29 points. It's early fourth quarter. Jared Goff will still be passing the ball. Players you're invested in will still be scoring fantasy points. And that's unique. A lot of these other offenses really take their foot off the gas. So I think from a real NFL standpoint, I think they're 1. I think from a fantasy standpoint, they're 1. So it's just really good things in Detroit. Shout out to Dan Campbell.
And let's talk about another offense that's absolutely red hot, and that's the LA Rams. We're going to talk about Matt Stafford a little bit later, but what's interesting is you have a matchup between Seattle and LA this week, and both of these teams are using like this heavy personnel, and Seattle's with Clint Kubiak. We've talked about it on previous pods, the use of the fullback, the use of 2 tight end sets. The Rams are in like 12 and 13 personnel, like a ton, using like 4 tight ends on any given week. This has led to incredible efficiency for Matt Stafford, and they're just absolutely rolling people the last few weeks. But what is this doing to Puka Nacua? Could the use of 13 personnel be the kryptonite to Puka Nacua having like this unbelievable second half of the season that we've talked about for many weeks on this show?
Yeah, Stafford is, unbelievable. Like even better than he was in his Super Bowl winning 2021 campaign. I know, there were theories, speculations that Matthew Stafford died and he's been replaced by a clone. If that's the case, dude, this clone is awesome. This clone is unbelievable.
Where is that one coming from?
You haven't heard?
I have not heard the Matt Stafford Terminator 2 theory.
So he had that back injury and he didn't practice until late August, and people were like, have you seen Matthew Stafford? Are we even sure Matthew Stafford's alive? And then, he comes back, he starts practicing late August, and people posted pictures. I think this is all very tongue in cheek, but that, he was replaced by a clone, and this clone has a birthmark here that the original Matthew Stafford didn't have. What do you think?
I'm gonna dive into this rabbit hole on social media after. I wasn't really prepared for it.
You gotta be one of those Facebook Vine moms, very conspiratorial, posting about birthmarks not lining up, and
I'm all over it. I'm all over the clone theory. Maybe
this clone was just bathed in super soldier serum or something, because he's unbelievable. He's hit 26.5 DraftKings fantasy points in 5 of his last 6 games. Josh Allen's only done that twice all year. Over that span, he has 20 passing touchdowns, which is 6 more than anyone else. And so part of this is that he has been replaced by a Chinese clone, and this isn't the real Matthew Stafford. And there's that, but it's also Sean McVay, another genius play caller, really in his bag. He saw what Seattle was doing, and he's smart. He's adapted. Great, good play callers are creative. Great play callers steal, and he is stealing from the Seahawks. Weeks 1 through 5. Their rate of 13 personnel was basically 0.0%. And then week 6, it was 16%. And it's like, oh, this is working. And then the last 3 games, they're over 40%. And it's working. Really impressive hyper efficiency. For those who don't know, 13 personnel is 1 wide receiver on the field, 3 tight ends on the field. This is working. They're, at a 40% clip. The drawback with this, and the wide receiver who is on the field typically gets peppered the hell out of the ball. Why? Because it's tougher competition competing against wide receivers than it is tight ends, and softer against tight ends. And so target share in these is massive for the wide receiver one. The issue for Puka Nacua is it's not Nacua. It's Devontae Adams and it's Kanata Mumfield splitting this role. And so, you've seen Puka Nacua's route share drop from 85% to 60 to 65%. That's even for a player as dominant, as talented, as who always gets peppered the ball no matter what when he's on the field. This hurts. This isn't great. This is substantial. So certainly something to monitor. And honestly, if you're the Rams, given Puka's injury history and play style, maybe this is smart. I mean, if Sean McVay is not in any big money fantasy leagues, this is really smart. So I don't think Nacua is a sell high just because you talk about power law assets, but it is a downgrade. And it is an upgrade for Devontae Adams, mind you, who, is seeing way better volume. He's top 2 in XFP per game, whereas since week 2, Puka Nacua is tied with Troy Franklin. So, downgrade to Puka, upgrade to Adams. How do you feel about this? Are you a little more aggressive? Are you selling Puka? Or you think the read's right?
The problem with Puka Nacua is once you get to that level of player, if you're talking about a redraft league, unless I can turn Puka Nacua somehow into Jamar Chase or Jackson Smith and Jigba.
Exactly.
I mean, maybe you could turn him into CeeDee Lamb if you're a little want to trust the game flow and go with just Dallas being in better fantasy situations. But I don't know. My thing in the last 4 weeks, we've also seen LA not play in any competitive games. The last competitive game we saw them in was on October the 2nd, where the 49ers beat them. That was a game where I believe Nacua had I don't have the stats in front of me, but I can pull it up. Nacua had a very strong game against the 49ers back in early October, but they beat the Ravens by 2 touchdowns. They beat the Jaguars by 28. Then they beat the Saints by 24. And this past week, it was a 42-26 game, and they were just having their way with the 49ers. I think that the next few weeks could lend themselves to a little bit more of the Rams being pressured to sort of with teams challenging them. It's really the next 2 games. It's Seattle this week, and I think Seattle's capable of beating anyone in football when they're playing well right now. That game's in LA, and then you've got Tampa Bay coming into LA. We know Tampa Bay can put pressure on teams. They can score. So you've got 2 straight weeks where we'll see if this 13 personnel was more reflective of the situations and whatnot and just be in control of the football game, or this is something that could really hurt Puka. But I don't know. Trading away Puka Nacua, not sure about that one, Scott. It's just really hard to squeeze it out. I mean, maybe if it was a a chance to get a Jahmyr Gibbs or something like that. Like you can make scenarios where, but it better be somebody who is also a potential league winner if I'm going to move off of that one. Scott, so in this week's Everything Report, you dove into the fantasy playoffs strength of schedule. It's worth like sort of the price of admission if you are looking to kind of give yourself an edge in fantasy football. And maybe you don't subscribe to Fantasy Points, but you just listen to us on this podcast. You should do yourself a favor and subscribe to Fantasy Points as well, because all of our packages are deeply discounted. You can get a further 15% discount using the code Theo. And there's a million reasons why you want to subscribe to Fantasy Points, but one of the main reasons is access to the Everything Report written by Scott and Ryan Heath every single week. It's sort of appointment reading for any fantasy manager. It's powered by Fantasy Points data, and it's absolutely fire. But this week you changed it up a little bit, and you really took a deep dive into the strength of schedule for the fantasy football playoffs. Let's go ahead and start and talk about it. Let's talk about the quarterback position. I'm going to rattle off a couple of these names and then kind of share your thoughts. So Drake Maye, who's in everyone's starting lineups, he's in great shape. Lamar Jackson, who's in everyone's starting lineups, he's in great shape. Joe Flacco, who right now is in everyone's starting lineups because he's absolutely balling. And then Joe Burrow, who is returned to Cincinnati Bengals practice, could be back in week 13, week 14. He's got a great schedule. But there's a couple of interesting names here. Tua Tagovailoa and J.J. McCarthy. They also line up. Your thoughts on these quarterbacks that you wrote about this week?
Yeah, well, we were on top of a lot of these. I was saying Lamar Jackson's a buy low, and he's going to wreck leagues when he returns. Last week was a little disappointing, by the way. And then we talked about this with Flacco, where it's like, yeah, well, he's going crazy, but he's had this pillow soft schedule, and we looked at the schedule, and it's like, oh, and it's just as soft from here on out. And that's largely the same thing with Drake Maye too, where he has had one of the softer schedules this year, although he's been totally agnostic to strength of, like, he's scoring more points in his tougher games actually, and yeah, it keeps getting soft from there. Tua is not really actionable to me outside of I like Waddle. I think JJ McCarthy is, I don't know that he's a buy low or a player to add necessarily, although the track record on Kevin O'Connell quarterbacks is incredible. I don't know that, and like that's part of the issue with McCarthy is like we've seen Nick Mullins have 400 passing yards in 2 of his 3 starts with Kevin O'Connell. We saw Josh Dobbs, get off the plane, put on a uniform for the first time, and perform at a really high level. Carson Wentz before his shoulder fell off of his body, Sam Darnold, Kirk Cousins. So what we're seeing from JJ McCarthy is concerning, and it's had this trickle down effect on the receivers. Justin Jefferson just had his 3rd worst yards per target of his career. Jordan Addison, the 4th worst yards per target of his career. But volume's really good for Justin Jefferson, 6 over his last 5 games, behind only Jamar Chase and XFP per team play. And so there's potential there if he can kind of turn things around. And really, you have to hope that's what's going to happen here because, he had a productive game against the Bears. That's a bottom 6 defense in his debut. Although all of it came in 1 quarter, he gets them again this week. And then he struggled against the Falcons, the Lions, the Ravens. Those are all tougher defenses. And so, yeah, it kind of feels like a do or die game this week against the Bears. But the one thing you have to hold on to is the schedule does get pretty soft in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think that you sort of nailed it. I don't know if it's necessarily us telling you to go grab J.J. McCarthy. I think this is the players around J.J. McCarthy are going to be in tremendous shape in weeks 15, 16, and 17. We have that Lions game in week 17 in Minnesota We all remember like last year that late Minnesota-Detroit game. That was an incredible football game. Maybe they could replicate that with another high-scoring one. You also have sort of Minnesota had already beat Detroit like last week, so that'll be an interesting one. Minnesota has the Giants in Week 16. That's one where even though it's on the road in MetLife, it's two teams that sort of are right now potentially heading in opposite directions. But the game that's really fun is Week 15, where you've got in Dallas, where all these quarterbacks have and skill position players have thrived against the Cowboys. So Minnesota is pretty much lining up there. Really, really interesting stuff at the quarterback position. Let's pivot over to the running backs. My guy, TreVeyon Henderson, awesome game last week. Shout out to my DFS lineup. We enjoyed a sweat. Scott, both of us had a very profitable day in DFS, but it could have been even better. But TreVeyon Henderson in my lineups, unbelievable. He's sort of locked in. We don't even really need to dive into it too much on School of Scott. If you're listening to this, you're watching this on YouTube, you know what TreVeyon Henderson did last week. And Ramondre Stevenson still missing with a toe injury. He's interesting, though, that if it becomes like a 60-40, maybe you buy him super low. Our guy, Devon Achane, who's a league wrecker right now. I had JJ Zacharyson on Fantasy Football Daily last week. We were talking about Devon Achane as sort of a under-the-radar league winner. He's got this unbelievable target share streak where he's had 20% target share or more in 5 out of 6 weeks. Achane is awesome. But then you've also got Quinshon Judkins, which is exciting. Josh Jacobs, who's in everyone's lineup. And the player that I think is really interesting, another Minnesota Viking, Aaron Jones. What are your takeaways here from your running back research, Scott?
I think you nailed it. I think, yeah, those are some players to target. Achane really does look like a mega league winner. He looks like basically Christian McCaffrey on the Dolphins, where he's so heavily evolved on the ground and through the air. Incredible hyper efficiency. One concern with him is he is getting pulled at the goal line, and Bijan Robinson's having the same issue. But, like he showed last week, doesn't always matter. So, and he does have a favorable schedule to look forward to. All of these players do. Josh Jacobs, very game script sensitive, matchup dependent. So that's good news for him. Aaron Jones trending up. I know, I think you recently bought him in a high stakes league.
Yeah, I'm buying him actually in some dynasty leagues where I have a lot of contending teams in dynasty, Scott.
Hey,
but these particular contending teams, it's like I'm able to buy a player that I think is trending upwards for the rest of the season, and because of his age, I'm able to get it as a very cheap cost. After the Rashid Shaheed signing in an FFPC, and this was a single QB league, I traded Torrey Horton and a 2026 third, which will be a late third, to get Aaron Jones, and then I just put him right in my lineup. I think those sort of trades are out there where you don't have to even sacrifice a second. You're able to get him. And then in redraft leagues, I don't think that the market's fully caught up with what Aaron Jones could be down the stretch. Jordan Mason's been just completely brushed aside here. This is the Aaron Jones show. I think you're going to start seeing some real spike weeks here. We saw the early touchdown this past week. So I love that you're on Aaron Jones here. The only thing he's got to do is stay healthy. And if he does, I think he's a player that can affect leagues, especially in the fantasy playoffs. Quinshon Judkins is an interesting one because we would love to see that. I think that if you're painting a narrative, you can kind of see in your mind's eye as a fantasy manager, Judkins scoring points when it matters the most down the stretch and in the playoffs. And then, Scott, we start having discussions where we're like, where should we rank Quinshon Judkins in our 2026 redraft rankings? I want to put him at like 18 overall. Is that too high? You can just sort of see it. He seems like that sort of talent that could rip off like 3 big weeks in a row. So love the running back list there. And again, there's a little more context in the article. Go ahead and check that one out. Let's pivot over to the let's save wide receiver for the end because I think wide receiver is the most action-packed. Tight ends are interesting. You've got Baltimore combination of Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. Those players, obviously Likely would be more of a contingent upside type play. If Andrews did get injured, I think likely would be an awesome player to have. But he's a hard player to roster in some shallow formats. Andrews, you talked about him in your article last week about how he's scoring touchdowns with Lamar Jackson. Mason Taylor, who you're going to have to really talk me into that one because I don't want to start any Jets right now. Sam Laporta, though, this is one where he's the only Lion that showed up in this article, and I think that one should get you really excited. Laporta had a strong fantasy playoffs last season, and then the player that you've got to talk about, Tyler Warren, and then another Miami Dolphin under the radar here pops in here, Greg Dulcich, who I guess could be Greg Dulcich / Darren Waller if you believe he'll be back.
Yeah, well, the one thing I'll say here is strength of schedule matters least at the tight end position. But fantasy playoffs, you do get really just look at who's playing the Bengals. That's the one matchup that really matters this year. Tight ends killing the Bengals just like last year, but so much worse. You have week 15, the Ravens, week 16, the Dolphins, week 17, the Cardinals. So the biggest thing to me is Trey McBride, championship week against the Bengals defense. That is game
that's
over.
Scary. That's scary. That could be 40. That could be the FFPC main event winner. The overall winner could have a 40 burger from Trey McBride in week 17.
Do we have McBride on any of our team? We probably don't. Dang.
No, but let me tell you about our Tucker Craft shares that we're running pure for a while. We're getting through it though. We're getting through it. We're the two teams that we're sharing are currently, I believe, like a 3 seed and like a 4 seed. So we're like right there near the money. And then the other team we have with Abib, I think we're like the 1 or the 2 seed. So we have a chance to put all 3 teams we draft together in the main event into like the main event playoffs. So we're doing all right, especially considering the injuries we've had to withstand, multiple players. So yeah, pour one out for our Tucker Craft shares. But yeah, man, I would love to have a little more Trey McBride in those money weeks. I mean, he could go absolutely nuts. Jacoby Brissett's been a QB1 in all 4 of his starts, and the connection he has with McBride is insane. And Scott, what's interesting with McBride is we had this narrative last year that the guy can't score touchdowns. You saw all the haters coming out on X that were referencing like his lack of touchdown scoring at Colorado State, his lack of touchdown scoring at Arizona last year, and then all of a sudden we have a quarterback change, and I believe he's up to 6 touchdown catches this year. McBride could end up with like 11 touchdown catches the way that this offense is trending. So I love that he's there. Now we'll get to sort of your favorite position, my favorite position to talk about, the wide receiver position. And this is an interesting one. We mentioned Minnesota earlier. So Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, both players had a ton of targets this past week. It was Jalen Nailor who scored the points. That's frustrating. Jalen Waddle, who we've talked about on School of Scott for like 4 weeks in a row. He's just been tremendous. Had another really strong week this past week in their win over Buffalo. The Seattle Seahawks, where JSN obviously, but also will keep a candle burning for a ramped up Rashid Shaheed, who at that point will be very comfortable in this offense and has a chance at, anytime he touches the ball, sort of like the Jameson Williams of this offense. And then the interesting ones here, Washington with Deebo Samuel and Terry McLaurin, and then San Francisco, where Jauan Jennings is trending up, and we should see Ricky Pearsall this week. Your thoughts on the wide receiver position?
Yeah, where do you just brought up a lot. Where do you want me to start?
Okay, I'd like you to start out with, I think the interesting ones for everyone to hear about is San Francisco. Your expectations for Pearsall and your thoughts on Jauan Jennings. Jauan Jennings had the fumble this week, but a really strong bottom line, sort of operating as the wide receiver 1. And I'll throw George Kittle into this mix too, because Kittle had his best game of the season this past week as well. Your thoughts on San Francisco first?
Yeah, well, I think this is one of the trickiest ones. If you listened to this podcast last week, I was telling you I thought George Kittle was hurt. He had a direct quote that he had a fully torn hamstring. This is a number of weeks ago, sure, but fully torn hamstring. That's something that takes like 5 to 6 months to come back from. The one Kittle note I did have is like there is a literal quote from Kyle Shanahan from like 4 years ago where he was like, well, if there's anyone else, they'd be on season-ending IR, but because it's George Kittle and he heals like Wolverine, I'm sure he'll play this week, right? And, a guy who just super tough, plays through everything. But the problem was I was looking at his separation metrics, and he ranks second worst of 54 tight ends in average separation score. And I'm like, all right, well, this guy's hurt. So like we shouldn't expect typical production from George Kittle. And then Jauan Jennings, I was making similar arguments for. He told us week 6, this is not a joke. This is what he said. He said it seriously. He had a high ankle sprain, a low ankle sprain, and 5 broken ribs. And he hadn't cleared 45 receiving yards in 5 straight games. And so I was like, I think Jauan Jennings is hurt. And so what happened last week, they both score a ton of fantasy points. George Kittle posts his best ass since he came back from injury. Jauan Jennings posts his best ass, his average separation score since he got hurt. And so I don't really know what's going on. Maybe they were exaggerating their injuries. Maybe they've healed up. Maybe this is just, a lot of volume in a blowout where they played against a lot of prevent defense. Maybe it's a combination of all those, but I don't know. It's just like a tricky thing because, okay, Ricky Pearsall is coming back. Is he coming back healthy? Is he like just as hurt, or is he more hurt than the other guys? And then you have Brock Purdy coming back probably next week, which is another wrench thrown into the works. I will say I think I'm most bullish on Ricky Pearsall. I think he'll be more boom or bust week to week, but he was playing at a really high level before injury. His ass was really high. I think it was a top 5 ass, and he top 5 in yards per game. But yeah, really you picked one that I actually struggled with when I wrote this up.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of a trust the process thing here. I can remember, we do this every year when the NFL schedule drops. We all end up making content on it. You did a tremendous article on it, strength of schedule in the preseason. Also, that's definitely worth a fantasy point subscription, sort of the work you did, you do on the schedule, the strength of schedule overall for the season, Scott. It's very, very top-notch stuff. But I remember Graham Barfield and I, we did a couple podcasts on it this past offseason, and I remember the game we had circled was Week 17, Chicago Bears, San Francisco, and you can kind of see it right now, like a game that could really, really tilt over. Chicago is going to be playing for their playoff lives, potentially. Ben Johnson, we expect this offense to get better. You've got guys like Loveland, guys like Burden that could be trending up at that point. And Ricky Pearsall just there in that week, in Week 17, you could just see it where he puts up a really, really strong week. So I'm there. I think you could also hedge your Jauan Jennings bets by also rostering Ricky Pearsall, who could be dirt cheap in some redraft leagues right now with people that are just afraid of what to do with him. And then Week 16, San Francisco plays the Indianapolis Colts in Indianapolis, a game where you've got Christian McCaffrey against Jonathan Taylor. There'll be a ton of fantasy eyes on that one. And then the potential blowout game to get the fantasy playoffs started in Week 15, Tennessee coming into San Francisco, a sort of a name your score type game where we could just see like all these 49ers eating. So I think just trust the process. It's a weird team. The Mac Jones, Brock Purdy discussions will be interesting potentially. But this is a team we've circled as a strong schedule all year long. And I think that they're going to end up hitting in the fantasy playoffs. All right, welcome back, School of Scott Fantasy Football Podcast. We're always talking about NFL, but we have another pretty awesome part of fantasy points and another subscription that you can have access to. If you are a college football fan, or if you just want to make money playing college football DFS, college football prop bets, our college football subscription package is unbelievably detail-oriented and awesome with an incredible hit rate. And we have a special this week where this week alone, we want you to try out our college football subscription so much that we're willing to give it to you for practically free. You can get the regular price college football subscription package at Fantasy Points. The usual price is $150. We're giving it to you this week for $5. That's an incredible value. If you want to put a bet on Jeremiah Love and Notre Dame, if you want to watch Jeremiah Love against Pittsburgh and have a little extra action on the game this week with his prop bets, see what we're saying at Fantasy Points. This week you've got Carnell Tate and the Ohio State Buckeyes going into UCLA, another game where maybe you want to put Carnell Tate in your DFS lineups. Check out Fantasy Points, the college football subscription package. It's absolute fire, and you get it for $5 only. Scott, what are you thinking giving away this package for $5 only?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the customer satisfaction on this is like 1,000%. Everyone who subscribes loves it, have made a lot of money doing it. Like, even if you don't know any of those names that Theo just read off, like that's okay. You just tailor experts who are hitting at a 69% clip. And yeah, so DFS a lot softer, props a lot softer in college football than NFL, but we have great analysts. And so, yeah, it's just, I think, giving you a chance to try it out. I don't see you regretting it.
Yeah, it's crazy how detail oriented it is. And it's sort of like we operate in different spaces almost. Brett Whitefield and I are going to drop a way too early 2026 rookie draft rankings over on Dynasty Life. So if you want to hear my thoughts on some of these college football players and Brett's as well, we're going to talk about Jeremiah Love. Scott's going to have a lot of takes on Jeremiah Love this offseason. He is absolutely not a bust. I'm going to call it right now for the School of Scott listeners. Scott is going to be on Jeremiah Love as a 2026 first rounder by the time we get to August. I'm just calling it right now.
I don't.
I'm just
see
calling
that.
it.
Wow.
I'm calling it right now. Calling it right now. I'm calling it right now. You're gonna get roped in to Jeremiah Love hysteria by next summer. But let's keep this one going. We talked about it before. Jeremiah Love obviously is going to be a huge rookie for us in 2026. We've seen a bunch of rookies hit in 2025. Of course, Ashton Genty, the usage is sort of trending up. We had the Omarion Hampton. Everything was sort of going right for about 3 weeks. We'll see him back in the fantasy playoffs. Obviously, Quinshon Judkins, some tremendous stuff there. Down to guys like Woody Marks, certainly Cam Scadaboo when he was healthy. We saw Travion Henderson this past week have an explosive, huge game. Is RJ Harvey the next rookie running back who's going to take on a huge usage increase and thrive and put up huge fantasy numbers? It's sort of a little bit of a running joke between the two of us the last couple of weeks with RJ Harvey. But now that J.K. Dobbins is injured, and I know J.K. Dobbins didn't get sent to the IR. We thought he was going to get sent to the IR for a couple of hours. But a lot of the Denver Broncos beat reporters, guys in the know, are sort of speculating this could be a huge ramp up for RJ Harvey. Your thoughts here, Scott? Is it RJ Harvey's season, or is Sean Payton going to do something goofy and we're all going to be frustrated about like Jaleel McLaughlin getting touches or something weird this week?
Yeah, I mean, this is a fun player for us. We had a bet on him. What was it? 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and I lost that. And then he, of course, did nothing the following week. Someone came into our mentions and was, shout out to Scott. Once the news about the Dobbins injury broke, shout out to Scott. He's not wrong. He's never wrong. He's just sometimes early or whatever. And I'm like, no, I am taking the L on this. I don't think Harvey was a good pick. I think we got lucky here because I was underrating J.K. Dobbins' talents, and I was underrating the concern that, Sean Payton historically likes a committee backfield. And so I think we got lucky here. Yeah, the beats, Denver has really good beats. Beat writers are saying, yeah, expect for it to be the Harvey show. I worry maybe it's a little less the Harvey show than we'd like. I worry, but that's about it. And like I think it's probably going to be really good. I'm expecting good efficiency for a running back, even if it's a little less on the ground than Dobbins. But it's a player I really liked. It's a scheme that typically is hyper efficient. It's a really good offensive line. And so, yeah, it's RJ Harvey time, baby. I got bailed out. I'll take the good luck because, Scattaboo going down, some of these other guys going down. We kind of needed it. It's good timing here. So yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah, we have RJ Harvey on one of our
Bucky
shared
Irving
main
and
event teams.
RJ Harvey. Nice few weeks for us.
Yeah, well, the Bucky Irving one is so weird right now.
Did I say Bucky Irving? I meant Rico Dowdle. I apologize.
Oh, yeah, Rico Dowdle, 100%. We're rocking it. I don't even want to talk about Bucky Irving. I've talked about it this Tampa Bay backfield. This whole, I've talked about it on the Waiver Wire show. The Bucky Irving situation is just disgusting. We're talking about Sean Tucker versus Rachaad White this week. Bucky Irving, I have no faith in right now because he can't take any hits on this shoulder, and they're still not testing it. So it's one of the weirder situations in fantasy football right now with Bucky Irving. But yeah, we're in good shape with RJ Harvey, Rico Dowdle. That team is sort of running pure. So we'll see if we can sort of keep things going here and maybe get a ramp up. I want to just backtrack to RJ Harvey because we have a lot of people who listen to our content who play redraft, but also maybe they're a DFS guy, maybe they're a dynasty guy. Let's look at it just from a lens. Like RJ Harvey, do you think he's a very talented player? Do you think this is a sell high moment if you're a dynasty manager now that he seemingly has the backfield and this usage ramp up? Would you consider selling before we actually see the increase to touches? This might be the high, because if he doesn't hit this, if we don't see hits this next 2 weeks, then it could be a little bit of an exposed situation. That's just sort of the game theory with if you're a dynasty manager rostering him, people are going to look at him as a potential league winner because of the Sean Payton history and now the Dobbins sort of the injury box being open.
That's a really good call. I hadn't really thought about it, and I don't know that I have a great answer. It is kind of worrisome, the lack of rushing volume he's gotten this year. The flip side of it is, top 60 overall pick, tied to Sean Payton for the remainder of his rookie contract. It's a good offense, or better than it's been this year. I don't have a great read. I think I need to think it over. And it's a player I really liked. So, we can withstand some growing pains. I don't know. How do you feel?
I just think it's an interesting one where I have a decent amount of RJ Harvey exposure, and a number of those teams I'm really excited to take on the utility, but then the game theory behind me is you can flip him right now and re-roll the first round pick you spent on him, and I think he's got a little less wiggle room than maybe a guy like a Quinshon Judkins would have had, even a Travion Henderson would have had, because RJ Harvey, and a lot of people get annoyed at this one because they'll say, it's usage in the league. I don't care that he's a little bit older, but he's a bit older. RJ Harvey turns 25 years old in February. So it's really what you see is what you get.
But I mean, I was going to say that's basically every running back is you get the rookie contract. But I mean, look at what Derrick Henry's doing. He doesn't have that.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting player. I mean, I think for me, I'm not actively selling him. I just was curious your thoughts on the overall talent. I think we both agree that this could end up being a really, really strong week, and it is exactly what one of the thesis behind drafting him, even with J.K. Dobbins. I think there was a lot of people who were higher on Dobbins than you were, certainly, but even with them being higher on Dobbins, they still believed Dobbins would break down because. And this one seems unfortunate, and again, a fluky one. Dobbins was very furious on social media, saying this was a hip drop tackle that caused the injury. So really unfortunate for Dobbins, who's really played at a high level. But that's just sort of the way it goes in fantasy football sometimes. And Harvey is going to be the beneficiary. Let's talk about Bijan Robinson, because you mentioned this earlier a little bit briefly about Bijan Robinson sort of conceding touches to Tyler Allgeier. And there's been other weeks where he's conceded touches and it didn't really matter that much because Bijan was, catching 7 passes or doing something explosive with his touches. But this is getting to be a little bit annoying. We've had 3 straight weeks now where Bijan failed to hit 20 PPR points. He had a 5.8 point outing against Miami, and then an 11-point outing. And I wrote about him in the Dynasty Market Report at fantasypoints.com. Every week I circle a college football game and an NFL game that the Dynasty managers need to be watching. And it was naturally Indianapolis versus Atlanta because of the running back battle with Jonathan Taylor and Bijan Robinson, who we all have those two among our top 5 ranked running backs in our Dynasty rankings over at Fantasy Points. But Scott, like, a funny thing happened on the way to the matchup. Jonathan Taylor had 5 times as many fantasy points as Bijan Robinson. This was a tilting one because a season low 2 receptions to go with 84 yards rushing, 10.8 PPR points. Is this a trend here? 2 out of 3 weeks now where it's been really gross, and 3 weeks without any spike weeks.
Yeah, so this is a serious concern. You're losing the goal line role. Those are the most valuable touches you could get. And so, yeah, it really knocks him a full tier back behind Jonathan Taylor, behind Christian McCaffrey. I think Achane, Bijan, Gibbs are all sort of the same guy to me.
Well, let's not do that. Let's rank them, because I think this is a chance to pivot. Are you trading? Because I think if you're a Bijan Robinson manager, do you consider trading him, especially in a redraft context, for Devon Achane? I think that trade's out there for you.
Yeah, well, so that's what Ryan said. I kind of view them almost identical. Achane has the same problem. Achane lost the goal line work to Jalen Wright last week, and it was Ollie Gordon before that. Maybe
is Achane's receiving role way more insulated on a weekly basis?
So it is right now. If you look at XFP per team play, it's which is really one of my favorite volume stats. It's Christian McCaffrey 1, it's Ja'Marr Chase 2, it's Devon Achane 3. He's basically Miami's CMC, except, like I said, losing the goal line work. But he's getting like a wide receiver 1's target share. I think it's above Jalen Waddle since Tyreek Hill went down. But I do just worry about, this Miami offense is a lot worse, and this Atlanta offense should be a lot better. So I feel like it kind of evens out. But Ryan did say Achane is basically a better Bijan for fantasy.
And I think, you talked earlier, like, Atlanta's a decent offense. We've seen some positivity the last 2 weeks, but Jahmyr Gibbs is a destroyer of worlds on maybe the league's best offense.
Yeah.
I might take both of them. Bijan might be RB5 for the rest of the season, which is just crazy because, 4 weeks ago, the two of us were talking about the argument of Bijan versus Jonathan Taylor versus Christian McCaffrey. The other thing to talk about is we talked about it last week, and we're always sort of keeping a dynasty outlook, 2026 outlook. We talked last week about Alec Pierce being a player that I know the two of us think highly of talent-wise, and I think he's going to get an absolute bag this offseason as a free agent, where Alec Pierce gives you fantasy utility for the rest of the season this year, but potentially more fantasy utility and an upside outcome in 2026 that maybe the market's not baking in. Tyler Allgeier might end up being someone's starting running back in 2026. He's a free agent as well. You can just see it where he ends up being a player that leads a committee by a lot. We talked about him sort of in DMs. Where do you view Tyler Allgeier as a talent and his ability to take on maybe a larger role next season? It seems like he's shaping up to be an under-the-radar player for dynasty managers to be stashing.
Yeah, I think so. I think he's one of the more underrated running backs in the league. Just the fact that he's forcing a more even split with Bijan, is a testament to that. What did Jonathan Taylor say to Bijan after last week's game? It was like, hey, you're next in line. You're going to be better than me. Just, it's coming. I think Bijan is easily one of the most talented running backs in the league. I think Allgeier certainly can be a starter, and he probably will, to Steelers with Arthur Smith, or if Arthur Smith is a head coach somewhere, God forbid my Giants, which is what I've seen some people speculate is very possible. Yeah,
no, they're
I
not.
can see
Are
that.
they?
Yeah.
Are they saying
yeah,
that?
Yeah.
I've seen the nostalgia with really making a hard push for like Steve Spagnuolo. Where are you at? Like, who do you like? Clint Kubiak. It's got to be Clint Kubiak.
It's Spags by a mile. Like, this is a Hall of Fame coordinator. I think this is the record for most Super Bowls or Super Bowl wins by a coordinator. Like, absolutely, like, needs to be Spags. If it can't be Spags, I would say, I don't know. It looks really rough. I do like Kubiak. That is a good call. Dude, Greg Olson, hire him straight from the booth. Like, I would much rather him than so many of these other, you just know, like, ball knower. You just, yeah, some of these guys are so rough. Arthur Smith, I think, like, is legitimate, really good chance to be a head coach, just because, like, his dad's a literal billionaire, and so like all these guys know each other. Like, he played bridge with his dad, or ran into him at a Fox catchers game or something. So yeah, he's going to be a head coach again for sure.
Yeah, you have to think about with like Steve Spagnuolo. Does he want this job? I think it's appealing though. The Giants job, there's like a lot there where you've got the quarterback, you've got the draft picks, you've got Malik Neighbors, you have a ton of pass rush talent. Brian Burns playing at an exceptional level. Or is he waiting to be the Andy Reid replacement? Like, you'd have to think that Andy Reid eventually retires and they give it to Spags over there. So I would like to see Spags back in New York. I don't think it's the worst one. I like your Greg Olson call. I think that'll be an interesting one. We're going to talk about some of these job openings potentially over the next few weeks, but we got to get you ready for week 11. Let's talk about wide receivers, Scott. Friend of the show, James Odunze, was talking about Rome Odunze, and Odunze, like, kind of reiterating the frustration there with saying that, the offense should be a little more catered to him. We saw it. Rome Odunze, really strong performance this past week. Trending up. Where are you at on Chicago? Hey, Caleb Williams is a QB1 right now in points per game as well. Chicago Bears are 6-3. But if Chicago is going to challenge people and be a team that's capable of winning a playoff game, they're going to need a big performance from Rome Odunze. What's your confidence level there?
Yep. I mean, pretty confident. High-end wide receiver 2 this week, I would say. Yeah, shout out James Odunze. I got one of his retweets over the week, so I'm gonna put it on my resume that I played a small part in Odunze having the second highest target share he's had all season. But yeah, he's just been, like, he hasn't been bad. He's just been kind of volatile. He's had 15 fantasy points in 6 of 9, and then the other 3 he was under 6. But on the whole, it's low end wide receiver 1 volume. It's high end wide receiver 2 production. I think that's about right.
I think he's really, really good. I think Rome Odunze is really, really good. I think he's capable of ramping up for the second half of the season. I know, like, Chad Ochocinco was putting some posts up about this. I think, like, a lot of these wide receivers recognize Odunze as, like, a really top-notch talent. We saw this red-hot start. Then we saw sort of a slow middle. And I think we could end up seeing this being the start of something over the second half of the year. So I'm big on Odunze. I acquired a couple of shares in a couple of leagues over, like, throughout the season because I didn't have as much exposure to him, and I want to have a little bit more. I think Odunze is going to end the season very well, and I think he'll be a player we're really excited about drafting in 2026 in all formats. Another player who starting to come along. We don't want to get too excited about this one, Scott, but we saw Luther Burden with 3 catches for 51 yards this past week, and this coincided with a goose egg from DJ Moore, and also now DJ Moore is banged up. Can we get excited about Luther Burden? Where are you at on this one? I know I talked to John Hansen about this one this week on Fantasy Football Daily, and the two of us, I think, are ready to get excited about Luther Burden. I had him very highly ranked in my waiver wire article. I know John, Tom, and those guys who do the other waiver wire article at Fantasy Points, they also had him very highly ranked Where are you at here? You're the ultimate sort of truther with this situation and this player.
Yeah, this was an Exodia, believe it or not, Luther Burden. And so like I feel like it just has to happen at some point. There was some really positive coach speak this week, but there was he basically didn't say anything differently from what he said, 4 weeks ago when I get excited about some positive Burden coach speak. Like the bottom line, like the stat I had was Burden has 90% of Olamide Zaccheaus's receiving yards, but what is it? 44% as many routes, 45% as many targets. Like, what are we doing here? Just, I know blocking is important and all that stuff, but like the guy is so dynamic with the ball in his hands. He's getting open. I would love, and Burden's, coming off of a season high in route share, which is encouraging. But the note I had was DJ Moore missed an entire drive. He spent it in the blue medical tent. And if you take that out, there was really no route share spike. I'm worried like nothing's going to change. But, because this is a player I like, because I was so bullish in the offseason, because he's played so well, I'm still trying to, add him to rosters, especially, deep roster leagues. Although, like, I'll be honest, like he's been dead weight on a lot of my teams, and I'm gonna be really mad if Olamide Zaccheaus just stinks and sticks on the field for the rest of the year.
I think that this is we believe in Ben Johnson. We can't believe in rational coaching when it comes to all NFL head coaches, but with Ben Johnson, I think we have to believe in it, where you spend the 39th overall pick on Luther Burden, the 10th overall pick on Colston Loveland. You have to think that these players are going to ramp up as the season keeps progressing. Then you've got the added factor that the Bears are 6-3. DeAndre Swift is a known commodity. He's that guy at the running back position. Rome Odunze is insulated as the wide receiver 1. But after that, they need weekly weapons. I think if Chicago has any sort of aspirations to win a playoff game, they've got to get something out of these rookies. I think that Ben Johnson knows that too, Scott. You're not going to go into L.A. and play the Rams, or go into Seattle and play Seattle, or into Tampa Bay and play Baker Mayfield in that offense and win a game there if you're relying solely on DeAndre Swift max usage and then as much Rome Odunze as you can get and some Caleb Williams scrambling yards. Like, I think they need to ramp up these rookies. So I'm optimistic here. DJ Moore hasn't had more than 4 receptions in forever, maybe one game this season. So he's nothing sort of like, I think this could be an opportunity where maybe this week against Minnesota, we see Burden have 6 catches and it sort of doubles up the usage. And then it's sort of wheels up here and he's on like the wide receiver 3 line by the time we get to the fantasy playoffs. So I will remain optimistic. He is a roster clogger for the entire year, but one I haven't really cut shares of. Let's talk about Tampa Bay. Let's talk about your thoughts on Emeka Egbuka. Exactly what we wanted to see coming out of a bye week.
Yeah, exactly. This is something we've been talking about for a while, the value to the wide receiver 1 role for Baker Mayfield and the Buccaneers. Last year, Chris Godwin ranked behind only Ja'Marr Chase in fantasy points per game. He goes down. Mike Evans puts up fantasy points per game equivalent to ranking behind only Ja'Marr Chase. Both of them went down for a stretch. Cade Otton was putting up fantasy points per game that would have ranked behind only Ja'Marr Chase. And last year, so like clearly valuable. And, Egbuka's shown it. He first 5 weeks of the season, he was a top 3 wide receiver by fantasy points per game. He picks up that hamstring injury. Next 2 weeks, volume really good, but the production wasn't quite there. He had the bye week to rest up, practiced in full all week. He said he was good to go. And then he had the volume, 13 targets, and the production, scored 27 fantasy points. And I think this is real. I think this sticks. I think he's, mid-range wide receiver 1 to low-end wide receiver 1. And I feel really good about that. Just basically everything you wanted to see, you saw.
Yeah, everything you wanted to see, you saw. Egbuka is just such a good player, and he's Baker Mayfield's clear number one target. 13 targets coming out of a bye week. I think Egbuka is here to stay. I think we're looking at a low-end wide receiver one for the rest of the season. And we got to give a shout-out to Tez Johnson, a player that we've talked about for a number of weeks here on School of Scott. He ends up having a really, really strong performance as well. Gets you 20 PPR points from Tez. Cade Otton also some very, very strong numbers there. He's sort of a sleeper tight end. Let's talk about, kind of end the show with this one. Garrett Wilson is now going to miss 3-4 weeks. They really should put Garrett Wilson on ice for the rest of the season. Jets are not going anywhere. But could Adonai Mitchell be the sneaky ad this week for fantasy managers? This is a broken passing game. We could see a change to Tyrod Taylor, but Adonai Mitchell's interesting. Mitchell could end up being the wide receiver one at some point in the near future for New York while Garrett Wilson is healing up. He has been a guy that we've been excited about. Second round pick in the 2024 draft. Huge separator, a big ass guy. Average separation score was always strong for Adonai. Talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, he was an elite separator. You heard Reggie Wayne say it too. A reporter asked a question about Adonai, and this, we had just been pumping up, tweets about how great his ass was for weeks, and Reggie Wayne was like, "Oh, he's gonna be special." Like, if you look at the separation, he might be the best separator in the league. Hall of Fame wide receiver Reggie Wayne saying that last year. Part of the problem is like everything else. He struggled with contact. He didn't do anything after the catch. Ran the wrong routes, made some awful boneheaded plays that, like fumbling the ball at the goal line that cost the Colts a game. And so, yeah, but I mean, he's getting a change of scenery. There's no one else to throw the ball to. Garrett Wilson out the next few weeks. Like, there's literally no one else, and this is the most talented receiver on the team after Garrett Wilson. So why not, right?
Why not Adonai Mitchell? Definitely will not cost you anything, and he didn't even play last week. But we're excited about this one. Scott, let me know what you have going on rest of the week. What's a game you're circling right now in the DFS streets?
Probably the Buffalo game stood out to me. There's a lot of really good games this week, but I was into Bills Buccaneers as a sneaky one. I think there's like 5 games with an over under higher, but that one looked really interesting to me.
Yeah, and make sure you tune in. Make sure you're checking out all of our DFS content right here at Fantasy Points. If you're watching this on Fantasy Points YouTube, tune back in. You see Scott over here dropping a lot of free DFS knowledge. If you're listening to this on the podcast School of Scott feed, go ahead and subscribe to Fantasy Points YouTube as well. We're the fastest growing fantasy YouTube channel for a reason. And make sure you're checking out Fantasy Football Daily. I'm dropping 4 shows a week over there. And Dynasty Life. Brett Whitefield's going to be my guest this week. Every time I record with Brett, it's absolute fire. And you'll probably see Brett Whitefield over here on the School of Scott podcast sometime soon as well. We're everywhere here at Fantasy Points. We're going to help you crush your fantasy leagues this season.